Hey there, welcome to the archives. So this episode is it's a little bit heavier, trigger warnings. Been thinking a lot, not a lot, but I've been thinking about suicide ideations, passive suicidality, MAID, and death by suicide. This post is going to take a detour from the last previous post that I've done, and it's going to be a little bit longer. What I mean, because it deserves a little bit more care and attention. And so I'm going to break it down into two parts. It might even be three parts, because I'm thinking of adding another one where I get into a little bit of a more of a personal thing. The first part is going to serve as more of a disclaimer, and we're going to discuss why the topic is so taboo. The second part, we'll get more into some of the reasons that people might have for suicide ideations. Um, and I might break it down. Right now, I'm thinking I'm going to break it down, obviously, into like the brain, pain, contagion, and like copycat phenomenon. And I'm thinking also about shame, the role of shame. Specifically, there's an article I read that was talking about death before dishonor within the Ghanaian community. So there's a lot of different ways, and then also like the circumstances, right? Just like really oppressive environments that people live in that make them feel really hopeless, and then hopelessness. So there's a few different themes that I'm thinking about. Um, Obviously, science plays a role in this as well too, like the neurology. But that I'm going to leave for the later ones because I'm trying to tease out what order to put them in and how best to talk about it, because it is a sensitive topic, right? That's kind of the trajectory of the next few episodes. Yeah. So, and just to also know, obviously, we don't know for sure why anyone dies by suicide, right? Because they're no longer here to tell us their reasonings. And so I just wanted to note that. Obvious trigger warnings as well too. We're going to be talking about death by suicide. Before I start, I want to state that I'm not suicidal. So there's no need to be alarmed. I've talked about this topic in the past. It's no secret that I've consulted medical professionals about MAID. I probably will again. I've also had this conversation with others in the past, including Deborah Hicks. Um, what triggered this is recently I was talking to somebody uh, who is also just going through it, and some of that feeling of hopelessness kind of, I think, jumped or leaped out. Um, and I tend to feel things that are not necessarily mine. And so, with the different ideations that come up, I've been paying attention to it and thinking about this topic. Um, because the energy lately is just very much over it, right? I even online I've seen people are saying like people are just we're tired. That doesn't necessarily mean all the way to that extreme, but um, so no, I'm not suicidal, um, but this is a topic that I have been thinking about, um, especially when ideations do come and go, right? I get very passionate about this for a lot of different reasons, and sometimes it can get misconstrued. And I, in general, just get misconstrued in a lot of different ways. That is part communication. That's also like not always having the most diplomatic tact to have certain conversations, or just not. Anyways, I'm not going to get into that, but I do get frustrated. I'm going to put it out there. This topic definitely brings out a lot of frustration, and it definitely does shift to a lot of blame. That could be uncomfortable, especially if we've lost loved ones to suicide. It is a sensitive topic. People will get it wrong, myself included. I've seen others like Teal Swan just get dragged up and down the streets um, for her discourse around this topic. I think it's really hard to get this topic right. It will rub somebody the wrong way. It'll come off as insensitive at times. Some people will think that you're encouraging others to have suicide, to become suicidal. The nature of this topic is very taboo, right? And this is the whole point of taboo topics. They aren't talked about for a reason. Things that are taboo are not talked about for a reason. Sex is not talked about for a reason. Mental health, mental illness is not talked about for a reason. There's so many different things that are stigmatized that is meant to be that way, right? It's meant to be avoided. This conversation is meant to be kept quiet. It's meant to be ignored. You're not supposed to talk about suicide publicly, right? Depending on how you grow up, I grew up in the Catholic faith, and we were told that like suicide um, is like a curse. You're going to hell. You're taking your own life. Like there's so many different negative ways in which we frame this topic that has nothing. That's not even founded in science. It's not founded in anything other than hearsay, other than stigma and discrimination, right? And so it is likely to bring a lot of backlash. Again, that's a function of shame. Like if you to control people, if you don't want people to talk about certain things, what do? You make sure that you heavily punish them when they do that. So then others get the message, do not talk about this, right? So suicide is one sure way to like never get hired or to have like employers questioning whether you're even capable of doing a job, right? People get very uncomfortable. We don't want to talk about it. Anybody talks about suicide or if they're feeling down and we just kind of like look the other way. You're just like, oh, avoid it, avoid it, avoid it. If I don't look, it's going to go away. It's going to go away. It's not going to go away. That's not how it works. And so it takes a lot of courage to have these kind of conversations, right? But there are people that are brave enough and they're sharing some of their stories. So right now I'm reading, what am I reading? Not Your Butterfly, My Long Song of Relocation, Race, Love, and Revolution by Nobuko Miyamoto. And I started writing this out yesterday. I've been thinking about it for a few days, but I started writing out yesterday. And last night when I got to reading it, literally, the section that I started reading was about the death of her grandmother. And she talks about how her family is from, or at least her mother's side, is from a samurai family. And her uncle, her grandmother's son, the family was displaced. They came to the United States, and then 10 years later, her grandmother went back for the other children because her 9-year-old son, was living with cancer, and they went back to Japan to look for a cure. So when they went back to Japan to look for a cure, they brought the rest of the children back with them to America. And shortly after they arrived back in the States, her son died. Right, the 9-year-old boy, he died of cancer, and soon after, her grandmother also died. And so her mom told her when she was growing up, her mom told her that her grandma died from a broken heart. That was a quote. And then years later, her aunt finally told her the full story. She divulged exactly what had happened to her grandmother, and it was said that her grandmother had taken her own life by drinking a bottle of Lysol. Right, she died on a Sunday. Is what is written in the book, and then by the Monday they were back to school. They were just pushing through life as normal. It's really, really hard. But basically, her grandmother died by suicide, and then you just had to continue moving on with life as if nothing had ever happened, right? And a lot of us know that story. That resonated with me, especially the Lysol part, because when I wanted to depart, when I was just really done, I opted for Drano. I never talked about my own experiences publicly, or maybe I have. I have in a blog. I took it down. I might revisit that old blog and share it again. But again, it's a hard conversation to have. There's a lot. It's very risky. It's very risky to talk about your own suicide ideations, and unless you're getting paid to for a mental health campaign, Bell Let's Talk will do campaigns, and you see folks talking about suicide and stuff. But they're getting paid to do that. They know that like this is their job. They have a livelihood that they can talk about mental health. I'm a mental health advocate, but I'm not paid to do this work, right? And often talking about these things, it just ends up backfiring because people start just giving you the side eye. You're not supposed to have these conversations. Because you're not supposed to have these conversations, it comes with a risk. Speaking of risk, I read Fat Joe's memoir recently, and he talked about having an ideation once in his entire life. And in the book, he talks about how him and his brothers got into a tiff. His half brother denied him as a brother. It was like, that's not our brother. And he really felt some type of way. He got in his feelings, he got in his car, and he thought about driving into a wall, right? In the book, Fat Joe says he claims that it never happened again. It was just the one time he ever thought about killing himself. But what was important is that he noted how much courage it took to say that out loud. Like I think in the book he says like, whew, like it felt like a weight off his shoulder to say that out loud and to speak it into the world. Because it's something that he kept to himself for so many years, which is what a lot of us do. We keep do you have a suicide ideation? Nope, not at all. Never had it. Nope, suicide, don't know her, don't know him, you know? So it's exactly like shame. You keep it hidden, you keep it covered. You just pretend you don't know them. You're not having these feelings. You've never experienced it a day in your life. Um, and so he noted how it took a lot of courage to say that, right? Because there is so much stigma around the topic, there's so much discrimination around the topic. It's so taboo that even a rapper who has millions and millions and millions of dollars understands and was afraid to talk about it because he knows what the repercussions can be. Right now, people are calling you crazy. People are saying you're insane, you're weak, you're all of these different things, you're demonic, you're possessed. Like there's so much negativity that goes around this topic that he understood the cost of it. I only have $20 to my name, to be honest with you, and maybe income will come, but there's no possible signs of income in the near future, so I don't have a whole lot to lose. Right? This is the work that I do. Having difficult conversations is my job, even though I'm not necessarily paid for it. But that's always been my character. I've always been the one that's asking people to have uncomfortable conversations because this can save lives. Right? Reading these narratives helps you make not feel so alone. Knowing that you're not alone in it really helps you. And so that's why for me, I think it's really important to get out and have these conversations, especially publicly, because then at least for me, I benefited from others sharing their stories. It's helped me not feel so alone. It's helped me realize that this is something that is quote unquote, it's not normal, but it is normal in the sense that a lot of us are dealing with suicide ideations. In later ones, I'm going to share statistics around just how common it is. But I just want to put out there, like, if you've never had suicide ideations, if you've never felt an urge to die by suicide, if your living conditions are so nice that you've never considered leaving this world by your own choice, if you have, if you're not in an oppressive environment, if you've never felt this level of despair and hopelessness, this is not going to make sense to you, right? It's not going to make sense to you. It's going to make you uncomfortable. It is a heavy topic, especially if you have lost ones, if you have lost loved ones to suicide, or if you have attempted it yourself, right? Please feel free to log off if this is not the conversation for you. If you're in like a really positive space and you just feel like you want to keep that high vibration, I commend you. Good, like just it's not do what you need to do for your own safety and your own self care. But the next few episodes, this is a topic that we're going to look at, mostly just for my own mental well-being. Like I said, it's been coming up a lot. I've been feeling that vibe, not only just collectively, but just just talking to people. You realize that like there is people feel a lot of hopelessness right now, especially with the pandemic, especially with financial crisis, climate crisis. Hawaii, Maui just literally just burned down because of the wildfires. Alberta is going through it. BC is going through heat waves. In Atlantic Canada, there's like rain and flooding. There's a lot going on in this world right now. And so it makes sense that people will have these kind of thoughts or not even have those thoughts. But passive suicidality is not wanting to actually take your own life. I think with Dr. Tama that talks about passive suicidality is like not literally actively wanting to take your own life, but just wanting to die and just living through day to day the motions of it. So I'll end it here, and the next videos will look at some of the reasons. I don't like the word reasons because I don't think they're actually reasons why, because we'll never know the reasons why, but I'll talk about some of the messiness. I want to get into why suicide can be weaponized as a manipulative coy to get people to stay, in relationships. Sometimes one partner will say like, I'm breaking up, I'm leaving, and then another person will say that they're suicidal and claim suicidality. Sometimes that could be a form of manipulation. Sometimes people actually do want to die by suicide because the breakup is so hard for them, right? So it's a very sticky conversation. 13 Reasons Why. There was that was it Netflix, the series that happened. It got into a lot of the complexities. Was very problematic in many ways. It also resonated with people in a lot of different ways. But breaking it down as something, again, manipulation, right? Like, I'm gonna kill myself as revenge. Like that, those are all really weird and difficult conversations that are very problematic. That like basically bastardize a conversation, right? Some of the other ones I want to talk about. Suicide can also be a form of resistance in some circumstances, especially there's articles I was reading around narratives of enslaved people, right? The evil people who walked back into the water and preferred to drown rather than to be enslaved. It can be hard to hear somebody say that suicide is resistance in that kind of a setting. But when you're in such dire situations where you feel like there's no escape, suicide can be a form of resistance in that kind of a setting. Again, when I say resistance, it's also very subversive. I mean, it's not that subversive. It doesn't really do anything because capitalism is going to replace you, right? Those enslaved that ended up jumping into the ocean, who would rather die, who did take their own lives, they were just replaced. Capitalism doesn't give a fuck whether you're here or not. They're going on to the next one, right? It's like the next bus, it's coming. And so it's actually not that subversive. And then same with the enslavement. We look at us now. Anti-slavery did come, right? So enduring. There's also, what is this whole thing around like it gets better? Sometimes it does get better. You do find a way out of the situations. The enslaved did free themselves, contrary to what DeSantos, or whoever, all of these politicians are trying to say, that they did not free themselves and it was, a handout and all of these different things. No, there was a lot of resistance. And so it does get better in certain cases, but for some people, it does not get better. The situations is just getting worse in a lot of places, right? And so I just asked us to have some compassion for why that would happen, rather than to demonize it, rather than to demonize the person who took their own life. That's just always been my thing. Stop demonizing people for dying by suicide. You have to understand the condition. Somebody has to feel so hopeless, so much in despair that they think that dying is the best solution. It's not. And that's not on them. The onus is on us as a collective. The onus is on the systems and the structures and the powers that be, to create different situations for us so we don't feel like dying is the best option. Because suicide is 100% preventable. There's no reason for any of us to die by suicide. Absolutely none at all. And that is what frustrates me. And that is what pisses me off. Because then, why? Your silence is not helping somebody, right? Rather than leaning in and helping somebody, we look away. That is not okay. If that pisses you off to hear, if you feel that is blame, then I don't know what to tell you, because that is not okay. Turning away from people when they need help is not okay, right? And again, some people will not ask for help. I posted on LinkedIn yesterday why people are also not calling the hotlines. No one is going to tell you that they're actually suicidal if they're afraid that you're going to call the police. If they're afraid that the police are going to show up to do a wellness check and their life is going to end up dead. Who is going to want to tell somebody, who's going to call a crisis line to say, hi, I need help? People are not going to ask for help if they think that is not going to help them in the first place, right? So these are just some of the things I'm thinking about. Made is a whole nother conversation. 19 minutes. Wow. I'm going to end this here. This is what I mean. There's a lot to talk about. And so I'll tease and parse out some of this more in the next episodes. Okay. Until next time, in solidarity.